Well, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov says his country is committed to upholding the Iran nuclear deal. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif met his Russian counterpart in Moscow to discuss saving the deal after the US announced its withdrawal last week. Analysts have suggested Russia could benefit economically from the US pullout, as it is less exposed to the consequences of renewed sanctions than Europe.
Today, we hope to see how we can, with the participation of the European Troika, China, Russia, Iran and the European Union, use the available mechanisms not to undermine this important document, not to destabilise the situation in the region, and not to allow new threats to the non-proliferation regime.
Well, for more on this, let's go to Moscow and speak to Alexander Prosviryakov. He's the president of the Moscow-based investment bank Whitestone Capital. Thank you again for joining Money Talks. Firstly, Iran's economy was in deep recession before the Iran deal took effect in 2015, and according to the IMF, just 1 year later, real GDP in Iran grew by some 12% after it did take effect. So I guess there's a lot at stake for Iran in terms of salvaging this deal, isn't there?
Yes, hi Oscar, indeed there is. But the main spike of the GDP, the 12.5%, was in the first year and mostly driven by the fact that Iran was allowed to export its oil and gas. So this was the main driver. In the years after that, the growth was around 4%, and this year is projected to be 4.3%. But not all is that good in Iran, because if we see, if we look at the currency, it is going down for a number of years already, and it hit a record low last week. If we look at the inflation, it's already above 10%. The unemployment is officially at 11%, but some surveys say that it is around 20% already. So the main driver is, again, oil and gas revenues that Iran will lose if the sanctions are implemented, the new sanctions. So definitely there will be a negative effect.
Yes, I'll touch on oil a little later once more, but obviously the main aim of this Iran nuclear deal was to make sure that Iran's nuclear weapons ambition was kept in check. But I guess we live in the real world and money does talk, as the name of our program suggests. So I'm wondering, with European powers, Russia and China all united in trying to save this deal, what's in it for them? Is there an economic and financial benefit for them?
Yeah, mostly for Russia and China, because if the sanctions are implemented, the main losers will be the major international companies that are operating in Iran now, because they will not be able to continue doing the business there. And this will give a chance for the Russian companies to expand their interests, their business interests in Iran, and the Chinese too, because the Russian companies are already under US sanctions, so they don't really care. And the Chinese are powerful enough. They will be a little cautious. I am cautious, I think, given what's going on now between US and ZTE, for example, but I think they will likely stay in Iran and continue doing the business. If we look at what happened in the previous few months, Russia dramatically increased the amount of investments in the Iranian economy, which did not happen before that. So this is a sign that Russia is ready to stay and expand the business in Iran, and the sanctions will just give an opportunity to do this faster.
And let's go back to the issue of oil now. And just a year after the deal was inked, Iran ramped up its oil production by around 1 million barrels per day after the sanctions were lifted. I'm wondering if this deal were to go belly up, if the major powers weren't able to salvage it, might that have a significant impact on oil prices and I guess petrol prices as well?
Yes, it definitely will. We can see now that the price of oil is already quite high, above $70 in the US and $76 here in Europe. But before the sanctions, and now Iran is producing 3.8 million barrels per day, 2.4 of which is exported. And once the sanctions hit Iran, I think about 500,000 to 1 million barrels per day will not be able to get sold by Iran, because the main buyers are the Asian countries, Europe and Turkey. So definitely, like some of the countries, they will stop buying if the sanctions get implemented. But China alone is buying more than $0.7 million, 7 million barrels per day. So this is quite good. The sanctions will not hit Iran as they did last time, but the oil prices will be elevated, and this is also good for Russia.
Okay, Alexander, thank you again for your insights and welcome back to the program.